Now we have some time for a discussion, and I'll start with Joseph Lowe again. So Joseph, in your presentation, you had been speaking about, creating local demand, for building resilience. And I'm sure that youth participation is very important for that, because now with this whole onset of globalization, going back to those old ways of life is not easy. And we can't really go back to the old ways of life. So we need to innovate so that our traditions remain relevant in our today's modern ways of life and they survive. So what has been happening in the communities you have been working on regarding this?
I think yesterday I participated in the webinar as well. And it was quite interesting. There are two components to this. One is modernizing tradition, which is, what the logical thing is. But interestingly, there's also traditionalizing modernization. So it's actually a two-way effort, as much as you want to modernize tradition, modernity, it can also be traditionalized. So I think creativity and innovation is actually a very important factor in this. And one has got to look at the form and the substance. I mean, there was also a study that was done in Poland. I mean, just give me 1 minute, which was actually quite interesting. They did traditional lace. And the traditional lace industry was actually very, very well established in Poland because of Catholicism and the practice of going for mass and the rituals where the priest needs to wear, the vestiges that has laced edging and everything else. But then because of the secularization movement, I mean, people went to, they no longer practice Catholicism, and then, the mass attendance went down, and then this industry was sort of caught because, it relied on the demands. So they had to innovate, to practice the lace making tradition alive. So they decided to make lingerie and bikinis out of lace to cater to, the younger generation. But the important thing is, this is where I think the differentiation between form and substance. Do you want to keep the form of the lace, or do you want to keep the practice of making lace that's important, that you can then go back, to make anything else? I think that's something to consider. I hope it answers your question.
Thank you. I just paused, to give time for the translation. And this is the request to all of you also, because after I ask the question, give some time.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I forgot about that.
So, what to pose, I loved your presentation, because, I feel that IP and ICH is where we have to all work on. We are talking about ethical approaches in the conventions, but we have a long way to go. Now, you have been, and thanks for sharing on Google platform, because we ourselves are also a partner. And I think it's a wonderful example where, they enable showcasing rarely known or less known ICH to the world. But my question to you is that you've been talking about corporate and you've been talking of NGO, but we have this whole third segment of community, the tradition bearers. So where do you see that in your puzzle? When you did your framework, you did not mention that. So I'd like to hear from you. What do you think about that? How to make them aware? And we know that taking legal action is not easy. So what is the way forward?
That's a good question. And that is the most complicated dynamic. And that's one that is also, community, they're the stakeholder, right? They're the ones for whom this is the most important. And they're the ones for whom NGOs are ostensibly serving as the broker. I think there's kind of two sort of ports of call for this. One of which is that in certain communities, if you are, they will let you know. They will make you aware if you are treading on their cultural heritage or doing so in a way that is inappropriate. But the other dimension of it is the communities that are disinterested or apathetic, and the communities that separate away from these kind of corporate NGO partnerships and just become disengaged because they either see the corporatization of their heritage and their practice, or in some situations, they see the fundamental commercial value. We see this a lot in, for example, in the States with New Orleans, where there is a very distinct front culture and a back culture, right? There are restaurants that are very much meant for tourists. And then there is an entire, behind this, there is a whole scene of local culture and music and art that is very much not meant for tourists and has no adaptation to that. And what's really, what becomes really unfortunate is that it becomes harder and harder to sustain that economically.
Thank you. Alessio, your examples of youth engagement were very, very impressive. And you mentioned about the challenges in stakeholder coordination. Could you share some more? Like, who are the stakeholders? And I know there has been a lot of IP-related work in Alps Foodways also. So could you share some of the stakeholders you engaged with, some of the innovations, and what can we learn from the experience?
Yes, sure. Thank you for this question. Stakeholders is a problem. I mean, dealing with many, a multiplicity of stakeholders in this area. I mentioned that there are more than 100 different municipalities in a region which is mountains or made of valleys, each valley not talking, each village in each valley not talking to the other. I'm pretty simplifying it, but just to give you the feeling of the situation. So actually, at the very beginning, we decided to do a camp in the nature at 1,500 altitude, not to make something too much complicated. And we decided to work with youth because we believe that it's essential to invest in new generation, but also not to involve too many complications among different community leaders, political issues, etc. So stakeholders, we have a number of different little NGOs related to culture, related to tourism, to the promotion of the territories. We have the municipalities, we have different leaders. We have many little, let's say, entrepreneurial figures, family companies, most of them related to agriculture. Or to rural, let's say, activities. And all these, do multiply this also between two nations, because Italy has certain rules and France has different rules, as it's obvious. But what we are learning in doing this, and really we are learning because it wasn't planned at the beginning, it's the importance also to reconnect to the question that you just made to our friend before. We are really learning how much it counts the role of the NGOs in this, in their capacity of connecting people, connecting citizenship, so belonging to communities, to a territory, with politics. When I say politics, I mean not just the administration politics, but the idea of development of certain communities and territories. And let me add, since we are facing a very peculiar period, the capacity of NGOs to connect citizens with politics and also with science, because now we live in a very uncertain moment. In Italy, as in many other countries, we are facing a second rush of the emergency, and it's crucial to try to connect people with decision makers with the scientific knowledge. So NGOs, I also to recall the question of imbalance in different countries that was presented in the opening speech. We are really learning how crucial it is. We already knew, of course, but how crucial it is also becoming in facing these uncertain moments.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, these times are something where we all are trying to find a way out. So I'd like to hear from you, and not in any particular order. So I'm asking this question to all of you. That you have already elaborated some of the fantastic points, like creating local demand, engaging youth, being more aware of the pitfalls of commercialization and striking a balance between sustainability and exploitation. So these points we have discussed. But and as an NGO sector, one of the things we can do is also share the learning and the knowledge. So what are some of the very good initiatives taken by government, corporate, or NGO in the constituencies you work with? If you have something to add on, I'd like to hear from you. Not in any order. Has there been something where governments have taken a step for the craft sector? Matti, you want to join? I think Matti. Matti, would you like to make a comment?
Yes. Yes, just if okay, I will present just a small point to this question. There's an example from my NGO, or the NGOs that we are working with, is with the digital festivals. And this, I think, has been something that has been going on in many countries. So I think this is very valuable and important for us to take into account that this digital reality is now different, and so that we would also make use out of it, so that the important points like Alessio mentioned, that there are troubles and challenges how to get the transmissions of the ICH to go on. So how we can make use of that, and then of course we have to take into account if this this digital future of transmitting ICH from generation to generation, is it equal in other ways, and is it equal and for all? Is it it somehow it makes it even more equal and accessible, the ICH in some cases, but in many cases also it doesn't make it more accessible. It makes it harder to access. So just to point out this kind of this digital future that we have, and especially we have very good and very different experiences from the field of folk music. And I think these experiences are very shared throughout the world. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Indeed, we work with, these traditional communities, and some of the folk artists, when first they started participating, the rural artists, when they first started participating, they felt it was strange because I don't see anyone. But once they started getting feedback and people started calling them and congratulating them, they started enjoying, and now they are really very free in using technology. So that transformation is indeed happening. I think Joseph wanted to say something.
Yes, this is a response to your question on policies and government's sort of role in sort of the consumption of cultural goods and services, local consumption goods and services. Now, a very good example will be in Bhutan. I mean, I lived in Bhutan, and there is the mandate from the king's decree of wearing traditional clothes for all official events. And that itself, sort of supported the whole hand-woven textile industry, so this is how governments and policies and legislation can play a part. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. I mean, in Singapore, unfortunately, there was a case where one of the former prime ministers promoted the wearing of orchid of batik shirt, and that didn't work at all. I mean, it seems like a very top-down imposed structural behavioral change. But I think it has got to grow from something organic. So I think it's a fine balance to find that where, it's locally accepted and yet supported by a legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to again. Oh, okay. Ray wants to add something. Yeah, please.
Yes, thank you. I don't have a concrete example because honestly, it's a very uncertain moment. So it's very hard to find the right words, elements to describe the extraordinary, let me say, times that we find ourselves in. We noticed that for any leader, any community leader in this time, the question is about uncertainty. In most of cases, it meant it created a sort of paralyzing effect. But the question which is emerging now is about trying to refocus some of the ordinary, let's say, activities to reorientating them to a greater, let me say, a greater purpose, a greater good, like how to use hotel rooms, not as an hotel, of course, not for accommodation, because it has no sense, but how can we use the vacant rooms to save lives? How to use cultural space. It happened in Torino, just in front of my house, there is a huge cultural center reconverted in March into a provisional hospital. How to use services like buses serving the valley community, not for tourism again, but maybe for improve the school services. So another point is that it's impossible I mean, we know that we are paralyzed, but it's impossible to conceive that entire sectors are being left to fail. So yesterday you discussed about, there was a question about solidarity, and that's the point, solidarity and support among peers should be an answer, a tentative that we must do to face uncertainty. And let me finish saying that for all these reasons, probably NGOs and communities efforts are really crucial in trying to foster and force movement towards this kind of approaches.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, because, you know, there are so many challenges that often ICH or the cultural sector as a whole falls at a risk of, you know, taking a back seat in priorities. And that's where we need to highlight how resilience of this sector is important for the resilience of the community and the people to combat these difficult times. So I'll just, I think we're nearing the end. So I'd like to really thank UNESCO, HCAP and ICH NGO Forum for organizing this very meaningful discussion. But I'll finish with one round, last round, with all of you, suggesting one thing we as NGOs need to, you know, give priority to. We'd like to hear from you. Yes,
yes. I mean, I think one of the words that could have come up and that should come up is relevance, and resilience and relevance go hand in hand.
Thank you. Joseph?
I think, yes, I think that is definitely, and added to this, I think it's also the innovation and creativity. I think that is very, very important. I mean, you know, because needs are changing all the time. And therefore, I think it is imperative that you have no choice but to innovate and to create, you know, to build resilience as well. Thank you.
Matti?
I would think participation, I think we have to keep all the individuals and all the stakeholders within us, so that everybody feels they are part of the society and they are part of the future. And this is, I think, very important with all the work that we do with the communities, that we give everybody a possibility to participate.
Alessio?
Yes, there are different keywords that we can mention. I mentioned solidarity already. I totally agree with innovation. This is very clear that we are pushed for innovating. That's the only clear thing that I can feel sure to highlight. And innovation means also, especially, to invest in future, in next generation, in improving the conditions for youth, so for who is coming after us in facing these issues, to be, let me say, a little bit more equipped than us to face such big questions, which will be there most probably also in the future, maybe with different names, but of course. So these are my keywords.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you. And so we conclude our session on Consilience, and we agree that our prototype for future, for educational source, has to be support innovation, has to nurture creativity, ensure that we're all together and we all participate. With that, thank you, and over to Ginia.